people looking at it kind of saying, well, I can just make my own content. I can do it in 5 minutes. I can do it in-house. It's not going to cost me anything. And while there's a certain small percentage of that is true, it ironically, that is actually taking those companies backwards quicker than probably if they did nothing at all, because by just adding to that AI slop, by kind of adding to the confusion, and actually crucially back to this point about building digital trust, they're actually taking away digital trust in their brand, in their company. They're actually moving further away from what their target is.
Imagine you're a decision maker at a mid-sized company. Your inbox is full, your calendar is packed, and every vendor claims to have a framework that will make your life easier. You follow the plan, the templates, the so-called best practices, and still nothing feels simple. Nothing feels human. That's the reality that Alex has been trying to map with his B2B frameworks. How do real people navigate high-stakes, complex buying decisions? And what happens when the systems we build assume they're robots? Today, we're going to put that question under the microscope. Hello and welcome to Work But Make It Human. I'm your host, Jim Mayer. Today, we've got a guest, Alex Cairns from Move, and we're going to really dive into frameworks behind B2B marketing and how Alex has made it more human. And typically we talk about internal things that can be changed to help make the world of work more human. But one of the things that we rarely realize or talk about is that the world of work isn't just the people who work for us. It's the people who exist inside of anywhere that we do business, our customers, our buyers, as well as our suppliers. So Alex, welcome to Work But Make It Human. So happy to have you on, man. How are you doing today?
Yep. Hi, Jim. Fantastic to be here. Thanks very much for having me on. Doing great. Thanks. You okay?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Excited for this conversation. Alex, my icebreaker for this show is a little bit different, but it's a lot of fun because it really makes people's minds jog a little bit. What's the most ridiculous workplace policy that you have ever encountered?
That's a tough one, actually, Jim. You caught me on the hop there a little bit. I wasn't expecting that as a first question, but I'm trying to think. You know what? I need to think back a little. So it's probably 17 years since I left the other side. So I've been a boss for 17 years. So I'm putting myself under the microscope here now, right? Because I've really tried to build my business up definitely from a perspective of employees first, and of what works for the collective, and of thinking that up together, really. So when I was back corporate side, when I go back all that time and I'm testing the grey hairs on the side of my head, yeah, I think autonomy. I think anything that related to autonomy was something that, look, I'll answer it. I'm taking a long route to this, Jim, but I'll answer it from the perspective of why did I jump to the other side of the fence? Well, I kind of wanted more autonomy. I kind of thought there was a better way than what I saw in my corporate career for 8 or 9 years, as it was when I was client side, corporate side at the start of my career. And so, yeah, anything that disallowed or prohibited autonomy and the ability to think creatively, to think independently, to find new ways, and to look at old problems, new problems with imagination, and with new style, really. So and that was probably consistent, actually, in all the three client side roles I did. There was a bit of a press down on autonomy, but to be honest, it's because they were kind of blue chip industrials, and but blue chips have their own rules, and that's the way it goes. You play by their rules a little bit. So I've kind of gone around the houses there as a first answer, Jim, but hopefully that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's great, man. Just like any of my shows, there's no wrong answers on Work But Make It Human because they're answers that I'm asking of you. So if that's your answer, man, I love that answer. So thank you. Alex, what do you think the biggest misconception that people have about how buyers behave?
I think the biggest misconception is that things haven't changed as much as they have, and that the old ways of doing things, what got us here, is still um, the best way to do things. I think particularly within the small to mid-sized manufacturing marketplace which is where we have a lot of our clients. We do a lot of our business and a lot of our thinking. And so what I mean by that, to kind of clarify a little bit, is that the buyer journey today, particularly over the last 5, maybe 10 years, I think it had started before the pandemic, but then it really accelerated. The buyer journey's just changed. It's absolutely transformed so dramatically in terms of the demographics involved in that journey, in terms of the way that they want to self-serve a lot of information. They don't want to be sold to, they don't want to be preached to about a product. They want credibility. They want to find some of the proof themselves, and they want to stress test some of that credibility themselves. So I think that's the biggest one, and it's the one that we've focused a lot of our work and thinking and approaches around, trying to help. Again, particularly small and mid-sized manufacturers appreciate that the game has changed a little bit in the last 5 or 10 years, and things can't just be done like they've always been done. That won't be enough anymore, to not just to stay relevant, but actually to stay in business.
From a B2C type of environment and try to incorporate the same principles into the B2B world.
Yeah, 100%, and we see it all the time. That, yeah, yeah. I think that when I kind of wrote the 8 moves, and when we started applying that to our clients, one of the biggest principle was really trying to find a systemized way of looking at the problem. We were seeing, I've seen over the sort of 25 years or so of my career, just consistent problems again and again with manufacturing marketing. Actually, what I realized would make a difference was if you could almost bucket and categorize let's call them, like, areas of understanding of, for writing a marketing plan and for strategizing kind of a complex industry kind of marketing plan. If you had that system, and if you had a way of benchmarking, and kind of looking at success and failure metrics across those, you'd actually have a much more robust way of building your whole kind of brand and website and digital ecosystem and campaigns on the back of that. So what we tried to do really was put this system together, this 8 move system, that I would say increases understanding, and then by increasing understanding, it gives manufacturers and other businesses in complex industries, it gives them basically a platform to find marginal gains. And it's really a lot of it was created on the basis of the marginal gains theory, and finding little 1% and 2% that might not seem like a lot, but when you add all that up, and when you're perhaps a small manufacturer with a fairly tight marketing budget, and often that's the case, you really want to be making sure you're getting the value out of that. So we kind of felt that by finding these areas of marginal gains, this was going to be the best way to extract, like, maximum value on behalf of small to mid-sized manufacturers, where they'd really get a lot of bang for their buck, essentially.
I love that. I love that. What patterns have you noticed in the buyer behavior? You just mentioned patterns or things that you've noticed over the last, 25 years of your career. What patterns have you noticed in buyer behavior that have changed?
So I think, and particularly in recent years, these are the ones that are really magnified a bit more. I think there's much more of a move towards having to establish trust digitally, and that's a lot harder than doing it in person. If me and you on this chat right now, that there's an interaction, at least that there's an opportunity in person to kind of establish some trust. If I'm reliant on a website, or maybe a social platform, maybe some digital material that I've got on that at a push in terms of a few different bits of channel activity, really a lot of thinking and a lot of work is going to have to go into every single pillar of that, to be sure that all of that is helping to build the journey towards trust, rather than, it can't just be like a tick in the box, or like, oh yeah, just stick that logo on that leaflet and that's okay, that'll do it. That just won't work, because it's so much of that buyer journey. It's like, it can be as much as 80% these days is happening digitally before an interaction with a salesperson. So that would definitely be one. I think, there's also there is a need for experimentation. I'd say that these B2B kind of sectors, manufacturing complex sectors, they're more demanding in many ways than for the consumer sectors. a million benchmarks of every type of marketing and advert, and it's kind of relatively easy to go and find examples of what works, what doesn't. But then when you're down into a niche of a niche of a niche within manufacturing, and actually, you might be selling not just the product, but you might be selling maintenance or parts on the back of that product. You could be selling a service package as well. There could be audits, could be all sorts of kind of things that go into that process. So it hasn't really been done before. So you don't necessarily have this kind of pool of available benchmarks to go at. And so I would actually say it's I say this carefully, but experimentation is actually really important in B2B marketing. Experimentation doesn't mean throwing money away aimlessly. What it means is actually doing the work on planning so that you can be sure of how you're experimenting with that money on certain channels that might not have been tried before. So those are certainly a couple of the key ones I think that we've seen, and a lot of that driven again by this shift online, this shift in kind of buyer behavior to really wanting more control. Actually, that would be the other one, that would be wanting more control over the process and the control to self-serve information to do their own, to basically to short circuit the sales process really. Still wanting to speak to a salesperson, and those salespeople are vitally important, but they're important at a different stage of the journey, much later down the track. So actually, that therein is another, which is kind of aligning the sales and marketing teams and messages and thinking onto one page so that everything kind of helps each other really.
Yeah. Do you think that it's fair for me to say that early stage marketing is more emotional connection, right? Because we're talking trust, we're not talking technical specs and those kinds of things, right? It's more of that trust and garnering that. So is it fair to say that there's an emotional reality of that decision making?
Yeah, I think that's right, Jim. I think it's undervalued in B2B and in manufacturing more so, definitely. But definitely you have to kind of ultimately about storytelling as well, right? So it is emotional kind of empathy and understanding. It's emotional appreciation of what your prospective buyers' problems are and how you understand that world, and giving them a sort of picture, a landscape of how you understand that and how you can potentially help. And you're right also that the technical stuff, it's still important, all of that. And I'm not saying kind of throw, you know, technical documents or fact sheets or all that good stuff out of the window, but it comes later in the journey. It comes really after, like, as a buyer list is a prospective buyer list is being put together. So you need that a bit later on to get onto that list, and then you're into the sort of sales conversations after that. I think that's right, that characterization. It's definitely emotion up front, and then the cold, hard stats, the science, if you like, a little bit later down the track.
Yeah. So talk to us about Move as the 8 moves that you have at Move, and what separates you and your framework for the hundreds, if not thousands, of other frameworks that land on marketers' desks.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It probably is the thousands, even it's the tens of thousands these days. It's a hyper competitive space, definitely. I think really because we're built from a strategy first perspective, we're built from those 8 move principles up really. That is the differentiator, because what I would say is, even where we don't apply that full framework, and for example, write a full marketing plan for a client, we'll use a lot of the principles in that framework to help them in other ways. For example, if we're looking at a product launch campaign over a period of time, or if we're looking at a new website, or maybe a brand repositioning for them, we'll still apply a lot of that. That the 8 moves at its core is, to really simplify something a bit more complex. It's a massive list of questions, to be brutally honest, and it's frameworks, it's kind of toolkits, but ultimately it's about questions. It's about real massive curiosity and testing, basically questioning everything a little bit. to the point that you then, because that gives you the ability, back to the marginal gains point, it kind of gives you the ability to see if you can find those 1% or even 0.5% sometimes. So yeah, it's really the eight moves and the principles of it in terms of very much strategy first, thinking about the buyer journey these days. That really is what drives us, what makes us different. We're kind of the antithesis, I would say, of maybe a traditional agency that is all about the tactics and channels and, can we just can we design this for you? Can we kind of build that? Well, it's like, well, no, 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 just wait, just slow down a bit, and let's think about all this together. You've as a prospect or a customer of ours, you've got kind of your opinion on how you see it. We'll give you our 2 pence worth, or 2 cents worth, I should say, and let's kick that about and kind of elaborate from there, basically.
Awesome. Awesome. So how do you think I mean, you took it a step further than I, from hundreds to thousands to tens of thousands. How do your consumers, your clients feel having that many availability, that many options framework wise? And are they different, or are they all somewhat the same in nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're definitely different when you at that kind of scale. Obviously, for me, I'd kind of almost characterize it. I think an interesting way of thinking about it, and the way you've asked the question has just kind of prodded this in my mind a little bit. But so if you think about, take a slightly different example to compare against, you think about that kind of marketing technology and AI landscape, and there's this graphic that's been coming out for several years now. I think it's Chief Martech is the website that has this graphic on, with like, and I think it's at like 15, 20,000 different tools now, with all the AI stuff in there as well. So that's tech and that's tools. And then to take a step back again for a second and think about kind of industrial or technically focused marketing agencies. And by the way, when I said thousands and tens of thousands, just to kind of caveat that, I'm kind of, these are the broad numbers where you include like lots of freelancers, you include lots of kind of one-man bands, not just agencies perhaps the size of ours, where you've got a more significant internal team and loads of disciplines. But even so it's kind of a similar overwhelm, I would say, to the tech and the AI tool overwhelm, which is, well, yeah, where do you start with that? Because they can't all be right, but then are they all wrong at the same time as well? So you're having it actually goes back to the one of the core principles that we built the eight moves on, which is this point around understanding how to build digital trust with your prospects and your customers through research and through analysis and through strategy. And so really it's almost like that the answer for us, or the answer of why ours works or is more suited to the demands of kind of complex kind of small to mid-sized manufacturers, is because it's been built from a core principle of trying to understand their journey and their pain points and their problems, and like I say, build everything around the marketing methodology and thinking from that core ground zero, really, of let's get all of this down on paper, let's get a plan together, and then we'll deliver and iterate on the back of that. It doesn't mean the plan can't shift as time goes forward. Big macro events can take place in the world that cause some rethinks. But so yeah, I'd say that that's definitely the way we've built our framework, and the way we kind of position that against all these other overwhelming amounts of choices that are out there. It's it's tools and frameworks. I totally agree, by the way, that there's a complete sea of them that I think if I were on the other side again today, I would find quite intimidating as a marketer. If I was coming in for day one, I just left university, I would find that quite intimidating as a marketer today, to be honest. It's but yeah, the world's
I
certainly
mean,
changed.
I sit as a solo person, right? And the amount of messages I get just on LinkedIn from people who have frameworks to be a better podcaster, frameworks to be a better consultant, I mean, I get tens a day, right? So we're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years or a year. And even for somebody who recognizes it, right? I still there's a moment of overwhelm when your box just keeps filling up, and it kind of creates a little bit more friction and stress for me as a potential buyer than it does any sort of clarity. Do you see that in the marketing space as well?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing. And by the way, I get targeted by maybe slightly different ones, but again, by, tons of these companies, claiming, purporting to help Move do a much better job of its own marketing. And it's kind of like, yeah, but hang on a minute. We are a marketing company. We can do our own
Exactly.
marketing, but we really don't need that. But back to your point, I think in terms of it's almost rather than almost overwhelm, I almost think part of the answer again lies therein, because that this self-serving information era that we're living in now, and that everyone's grown accustomed to doing that. It is actually where there is some parallel with the B2C world, because in the B2C world, if you were buying a new car or something, you would go and do a lot of research, and you would read up reviews, social proof, you'd get credibility. So I think those aspects, those are things that they're methodologies that do need to feed through in terms of, well, we need to answer those needs a little bit, and we need to make sure that in that buyer's journey, we're covering off boxes A, B, C, that we're thinking about how they're going to go over here, and maybe look for case studies, testimonials or something to get some social proof and credibility. So I think that the way around the overwhelm is by researching rigorously, by not leaving things to chance, really. It's, ultimately that there is a bit of risk in sort of going on, but that's where you can't leave things to chance, which is if you just go off the first few results off a search, that might not be enough, because that might not really give you the depth of information you need to really check every aspect of, your need might be slightly different than the next company. So it's doing the hard yards, it's taking the time. It's almost, especially these days, I think there's so much content out there now, and AI is kind of accelerating all this as well. Finding the point of truth and having a way of picking out the real from the unreal or the fake that's part of the risk reduction of being a B2B buyer. Whatever you may be buying from B2B perspective, by the way, whether it's manufacturing products or whether it's stationery for a company.
Yeah, absolutely. So, uh, how do we how can buyers, because, and I'm sure this statistic is old at this point, but at one point the statistic was 65% of the B2B buyer journey is complete before they even reach out to a salesperson, right? And whether that's outdated and that number's higher or lower, whatever the case is, it's still an astronomical amount of the buying journey completed before they're in touch with a human being.
Mhm.
How does your framework, let me re-ask this question. Does your framework help your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. It was created with that in mind, and I think, and by the way, that we see different things with that stat. We often talk about 80%. You know what? The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It used to be kind of 65%. You're right, and I think it's gone up to the 80% mark. Regardless, you're talking about like two thirds to three quarters of the entire process. So it clearly is the most dominant part of the process to influence. And yes, the reason we came up with those buckets, those 8 categories, those 8 moves of B2B was, well, if we can help our customers and help, our clients kind of understand much more deeply each of these 8 areas, and plan accordingly, and put the insights together, put the almost analysis together of, okay, what does this actually mean for tangibly what we're going to do when it comes to implementing the marketing plan, then that's going to increase their chances of success. And in what are complex industries, what are complex products to sell, often taking 6 to 18 months or more for a sales cycle. Lots of stages of kind of research, lots of changing kind of customer demographic and buyer demographic in terms of who's looking for the product. So if we can take all of that into account when we do the plan, then we set ourselves off much better for success than if we just, oh, what was the figure for the marketing budget last year? Okay, we'll take that figure again and add 5% on, or more likely take 5% off, or more than 5% off, and then we'll just do that, right? We'll do some trade shows. We'll print a few leaflets, and it'll all be okay. And it's kind of like, again, the 8 moves of B2B was very much about, it won't be okay. It really won't be okay. That there's got to be a new way of doing this, you know.
I love it. So, is it fair to say that the 8 moves centers the buyer's humanity without losing strategic impact?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a nice way of putting it, because I think there is a balance between the two. It's still about, as much about emotion as about the science. Like I say, the science part is almost the going through the steps of the framework itself, putting all of that analysis together. But what I would say is that that unlocks the emotional part, because once you've got all that, then you can actually think emotionally and from a connection perspective about, okay, well, this is the story. We've got all the info here. We kind of can see where the buyers are, we can see what they're doing, et cetera, et cetera. How do we connect with them and tell our story in the best way? Because there's 100 other competitors potentially out there. And I'm always surprised, by the way, even in some of the niche of niches, and you get a new client, they'll say, yeah, we've really only got a couple of major competitors. And then you do a bit of research and it's like, well, no, you haven't. You've got like potentially 100 competitors here in all and some of these, they may be making other products as well, but you need to consider them because they're in your space. They're taking some of that work. So it's kind of like, how are we going to stand out and tell a story that resonates and that does make the connection, but is still grounded in, truth and the core of who we are as a company, and that the product does what it does, because that's important as well, by the way. It does need to do what it does, but what are the other bits we can leverage, whether that's heritage, whether it's some, values within the staff, whether it's an ethos, whether it's a way of working that's, high integrity, or something that maybe some other companies don't show it. That there's ways of illustrating and articulating everything like that. So yeah, I think that's at the core of that, really. Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes where you have almost tick in the box tender routines or exercises that don't that don't really invite a two-way collaboration, that probably speaks against but what we've just talked about there in terms of that emotional connection, because it's hard for a tick in the box tender exercise really to ever have major emotional connection, because it is literally just figures on a spreadsheet and kind of like, can we hit this percentage, et cetera, et cetera. So I think I think enlarging that process and that approach towards buying and choosing products and suppliers is is a more healthy way of, again, navigating what is really just a lot of huge amount of uncertainty in this day and age. And I've sort of categorized it up to now as kind of some of the AI aspects and the digital aspect. But if you go beyond that and you sort of look at geopolitically what's happening in the world, I think it's fair to say uncertainty is an accurate word to pretty much describe where we're at. And no one can quite know what might happen next, where things are going to go. But I think with that, the more grounded you can be, as any business, by the way, not just manufacturers, the more grounded you can be in your marketing thinking and planning and understanding, the better you can be, the better you can be ready for the long term in terms of whatever's going to happen with that uncertainty. I do think there's a need for some agility and dynamism, for sure, and that's why I talk about 8 moves as being updatable. It can evolve, if circumstances change as a 12-month period goes on. But at the very least, you've got some kind of roadmap at a time when, yeah, that is a really valuable thing to have in this day and age, I think.
Yeah. I agree wholeheartedly. How is AI and AI slop, because we see a lot of that, right? How is AI impacting traditional or maybe even newer frameworks like 8 moves in the B2B marketing space?
I think in the world we're in, which is we'd probably class it as like complex industries or very complex industries. I think it's early days still, if I'm honest. And, that's not to say I think it's early days of AI across the board, but I think specifically in how to develop real purposeful strategies for a technically complex manufacturer or company, it really at the moment can't do that. And that's not to say it won't be able to, by the way. Things are obviously moving so fast. I think it's made things more complicated from a planning and from a differentiation point of view in terms of the content piece that you talk about, because, you obviously get a lot of companies and people looking at it kind of saying, well, I can just make my own content. I can do it in 5 minutes. I can do it in house. It's not going to cost me anything. And while there's a certain small percentage of that is true, ironically, that is actually taking those companies backwards quicker than probably if they did nothing at all. Because by just adding to that AI slot, by kind of adding to the confusion, and actually crucially back to this point about building digital trust, they're actually taking away digital trust in their brand, in their company. They're actually moving further away from what their target is, and yet they're kind of doing it with almost their head in the sand, or kind of their eyes just with a blindfold over a little bit, because it's this new fad, it's this new trend. We should be on it. We need to be saving money, So I think there's a lot of nuances in it. I would say and again, that's coming from the perspective of an agency who have invested somewhat in AI as well, and we're trying to infuse it into some of our processes, but we're definitely doing it in a calculated way. I would say, like a carefully calculated way, rather than a just blanket kind of, put that in, make that more efficient. The same nuances, the same complexities are all still there when you get down to these niches and telling these complex stories and picking and not finding these marginal gains, and that still lives with human expertise for now. For now, like I say, it's an evolving thing for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think anybody listening right now, I mean, I see it, and I definitely tend to scroll past somebody who puts out something very AI. Or if I get a LinkedIn DM about some new I mean, I got two over the weekend, two different people offering to help me with editing, podcast editing, or one had a framework to become a more efficient podcaster. Both of them were written with AI, and it was so obviously written with AI that I didn't respond. Like I am not going to take the time out of my weekend or even work day to respond to something that obviously the perception for me is that you didn't take the time to directly craft that message to me. Why would I take the time to directly craft a response back to you, right? Because
Absolutely.
I'm not going to use AI to write my response. So I think that does that sentiment kind of capture what you just said?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right. I think we live in an age now where time is even more precious than it ever was before. And so that basic human courtesy of writing an offer, or, making a proposal, or and that's the direct way, but otherwise of putting together an ecosystem of information that is created almost selflessly by the company to try and inform the buyer. I think it is the best way to try and start building that trust with, potential clients and prospects that don't know of your brand, or, whatever your product or service is yet. It's trying to help them through their journey a little bit, regardless of whether they ultimately end on you and end up buying your product or not. If you kind of helped them along the way there, actually that is going to stand you in good stead for the long term regardless. They might make that purchasing decision and maybe it doesn't go your company's way, but when that product is bought again, it could be 6 months, it could be 2 years later, whatever. More than likely, you will have stayed on their list of kind of ones to look at again. And then, sure enough, that's how you then end up on a short list, and eventually you win the client. And then it's the hard yards of actually trying to keep that client and do the good stuff to keep them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What's the old adage? People buy from people, and buyers want that uniquely human experience, and they want to feel like it's tailored to their pain points. And
Definitely.
I don't think that AI necessarily at this stage of AI at least captures that ability. Age of a ton of just information and a ton of data and a ton of AI stuff out there. They're looking for that human connection.
Absolutely, and even more so, by the way, where it's a B2B purchase, because that they're in the business of risk reduction. That's inevitably what a B2B purchase still is. So much of the time, it's about risk reduction. So if you don't know the person on the other end of that, if you don't have that connection, difficult to reduce risk. You're going to feel a little bit like there's risk involved, you know. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Alex, we're going to start wrapping up here a little bit, but if you could like redesign or fix B2B marketing so that buyers felt like the process was more human, what would you change?
yeah, that's a good question again, Chin. I'm trying to think of the one single thing that kind of carries through. I think I'd kind of change the basically give more permission to research and kind of look at the vast kind of like array of information and suppliers out there, rather than depend on, checklists or lists of suppliers that have been known for years and years. I think if you look at the way the business world, that the commercial world has kind of evolved, and it's such a global marketplace now, finding the best takes time, and actually that takes a bit of patience. It actually needs a bit of slowing down to speed up. Ironically, that is almost the antithesis of this kind of AI and digital age and so on. But it's not to say that AI and the digital ecosystems can't be useful, because actually they're critical. They're right at the heart. They're the platform really in terms of finding a lot of the information. But it's just that, yeah, that if that makes sense, that patience to research and check and see if there is someone who does that better, or see if that something else is possible, because it's that's an art in itself, you know. So buyers who are going through that process, that their expertise, that what our professional at is buying, take some time, do that research, do the buying, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Alex, last question. What haven't I asked you that you want to share with the audience?
I don't think anything in particular. I guess the one I thought that might come up, to be fair, Jim, was the kind of traditional butting of heads, let's say, between marketing and sales, and where I think kind of a strategic outlook fits into that narrative. And so my 2 cents on that are that I think this era now is the best opportunity ever for marketing and sales to actually start plugging into each other a bit more, and actually to be getting onto the same page from the start a bit more. Again, it's you were asking me about the sort of the core drivers and principles for the 8 moves, and I forgot that one, I think, at the time, but it was again one of the drivers, which is that I've been client side for years, seen those two departments butt heads, and then even as I came kind of agency side and started out in this world of providing services back to the businesses, just kind of saw the objectives being running counter to each other a little bit. And I don't think that that's going to be the best way for manufacturing businesses to evolve. I think that those two departments need to be sat in the same room, looking at the same objectives, agreeing together what the landscape and the prospects world and journey looks like, and then coming up with the solutions together as well. I think it's really important. I think that those are the two departments within a wider organization, that they're not always the ones that naturally a lot of thought is given to, that interaction and that journey, but it's where great things can happen if you can align the objectives of those two groups.
Alex, thank you for being part of this, man. I appreciate the conversation. This was a great chat.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity, Jim. We really, really enjoyed coming along and you inviting me on here. And yeah, it's been good to sort of chew the fat on it a little bit, and love the conversation.
Yeah, me too. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here. Quick reminder from this chat with Alex, the TLDR work in the world is not just always about delivering outcomes. It's about how real people experience those outcomes. And that's really what we discussed today is how marketing is experienced to achieve the outcomes that anyone's looking to achieve. So again, thank you all for being here. If you have a story, a framework, a system, or again, a story about how the world of work has been messy for you, please send it over. I love to have those in or insert those in my conversations with my guests. If you enjoyed this show, please take 2 minutes, 2 seconds really, to rate and review the show over on whatever platform you're on. It's not for my ego. It's not for Alex's ego. It's to help other people find this episode. And it's a great episode where we talked about some really important things here. So until next time, let's all work to make work more human.